Hey y'all, it's ecology time. So thank you so much for joining us today. We get to talk about producers, consumers, food chains, food webs. All right, so as always, remember to pause, rewind, watch as many times as needed until you feel like you're an ecologist yourself. All right, let's do this. Science rocks.
So get some energy and go ahead and open up your Google Drive or Spiral Notebook and let's get this party started. So copy down these 23 vocab words. Remember, they go in ABC order like this. And just come back later and create your own definitions of these words. Remember to use your own words and to draw pictures. So make sure to for sure draw out the pyramids and the food chains and such and label those out. So pause this if you need to finish writing down the terms. All right, a trophic level describes the feeding level of an organism. So you have producers, primary consumers, secondary consumers, tertiary consumers, even decomposers. These are all trophic levels that can be used to describe an organism's place in an ecosystem. All right, so producers, also known as autotrophs, we'll put this down there. Okay, they get their energy straight from the sun, like plants, right? The energy from the plant is transferred to the primary consumers because they eat the plant, all right? Like a grasshopper, okay? So the grasshopper would be the primary consumer. Think, it's the first thing to eat it, so primary first. All right, the energy from the grasshopper is transferred to the secondary consumer. All right, because they eat the grasshopper like frogs. Okay, so the frog would be the secondary consumer. Think they're really like the second thing to eat it, kind of. All right. The energy from the frog is transferred to the tertiary consumer because they eat the frog, like a big snake. Okay. So the snake would be the tertiary consumer. You could write this example out in a food chain. Okay. So you've got, let's see, the grass, the energy from the grass is transferred to the grasshopper. The energy from the grasshopper is transferred to the frog. The energy from the frog is transferred to the snake, okay, in each one of its levels. So we've got the producer, the primary consumer, the secondary consumer, and the tertiary consumer. Okay, so here's another food chain. This food chain shows the flow of energy from a producer, which is algae, to consumers in the ecosystem. Okay, the minnows are the primary consumers. The salmon is the secondary consumer, and the bears are the tertiary consumers. So the arrows in a food chain or a food web represent the direction of energy flow. So the arrow points from the organism that's being consumed to the organism that is receiving that energy. So the energy from the algae is transferred to the minnow. The energy from the minnow is transferred to the salmon. The energy from the salmon is transferred to the bear. A food web is a group of interconnected food chains. So, organisms within a food web can belong to more than one trophic level or more than one feeding level. Okay, so for example, in this food web, krill, right here, krill could actually be primary, secondary, or tertiary consumers. Okay, so look at this. Krill are primary consumers because they eat this producer, this phytoplankton. Okay, so we've got producer and then primary consumer. But look at this. the other herbivorous zooplankton could eat the phytoplankton, and then the krill could eat that. So you've got producer, primary consumer, secondary consumer. Okay, but check this out. Right here you've got producer with the phytoplankton, primary consumer with the herbivorous zooplankton. Ooh, follow this arrow. To carnivorous zooplankton, then to krill, and then krill would actually be the tertiary consumer. Ecosystems obey the laws of conservation of matter and energy. Although matter may change forms as it cycles through an ecosystem, the amount of matter remains constant. And energy is also transformed as it flows through the system, but all of the energy that's captured by producers is eventually released and returned to the environment as heat, right? And then guess what? During photosynthesis, plants suck up that heat energy again from the sun. So, cycles, y'all. Okay, ecological pyramids are models that show how energy flows through ecosystems. Ecological pyramids can show the relative numbers of organisms, biomass, or amounts of energy at each trophic level in an ecosystem. So every step in the pyramid represents a different trophic level, all right? The base of the pyramid always represents producers, and all the other levels above the base are occupied by the consumers. So you always have the producers at the bottom, and then we've got primary consumers, and then secondary consumers, and then tertiary consumers. So the total number of trophic levels in the pyramid is determined by the number of organisms in that specific food chain or food web. Okay, so you could have a pyramid that just stops at secondary consumers if that's what the food chain was. So a little bit more detail about the numbers pyramid. A number pyramid is a diagram that represents the number of individual organisms represented at each level. Okay, so you have these ecologists that they look at a certain specific area of land in a certain specific environment, okay, and they come up with these numbers. So it can be used to examine how the population of a certain species maybe affects another. The autotrophic level is represented at the base. Remember, that's the producers, the base. So in this certain numbers pyramid, you've got about 1,000 plants in the producer level. This represents the total number of individual producers available to support the energy needs of that ecosystem. Okay, in most cases, number pyramids look very similar to energy pyramids. The number of organisms usually decline as one goes up the trophic level. Okay, so you've got 1,000 to 100 to 10 to 1. So in this specific space, when there's about 1,000 plants, okay, at the producer level, that primary consumer level, there'd be about 100 minnows, and at the secondary consumer level, about 10 perch, and at the tertiary consumer level, about 1 heron. So the biomass pyramid represents the total mass of living organic matter, so the biomass at each trophic level in an ecosystem. So since the number of organisms is generally reduced in each successive trophic level, like we just talked about, the biomass at each trophic level is reduced as well. Okay, so in this example, you've got the producers at the bottom, of course, with about 1,000 kilograms, the primary consumers with about 100 kilograms, and secondary consumers at 10 kilograms, and tertiary consumers at 1 kilogram. An energy pyramid is a diagram that shows the relative amounts of energy located within each trophic level. Only about 10% of the energy produced at each level is available to the one above it. So you could do this pyramid as a percentage 2. Okay, so at the bottom, at the producer level, you have you have 100% of that energy available straight from the sun to the producers. At the primary consumer level, you only have 10% of that energy. At the secondary consumer level, you only have 1% of that energy. And at the tertiary consumer level, you only have 0.1% of that original energy from that first level. Okay, so energy can also be written as joules. So they did this for the producer level. You've got about 1,000 joules of energy. Primary consumer, 100 joules. Secondary consumer, 10 joules. Tertiary consumer, 1 joule. Okay, I've also seen it written in, not as easy thinking. So with the ones, it tends to, look pretty easy, but, they could have 9,000 joules, right? And at the primary consumer, you just move that decimal over 1. So there'd be 900 joules. And at the secondary consumer level, move that decimal over one more time, 90 joules of energy available. And at the tertiary consumer, move that decimal to the left one more time, only 9 joules of energy available. Here's another awesome video over ecology that you can pause now and watch, or copy it down and watch it later. Okay, so for some practice questions. Number 1, producers are autotrophic. That is, they are able to feed themselves by converting carbon dioxide from the air and light energy from the sun into food. So you could call producers autotrophs. Consumers and decomposers are heterotrophic. So you could call consumers heterotrophs. This means that these organisms must obtain their food by eating other organisms or organic matter. So the relationships among producers, consumers, and decomposers carrying out either autotrophic or heterotrophic nutrition are identified through what? Through Punnett squares, the periodic table, food webs, or feedback mechanisms. So food webs provide visual representations that identify these relationships among producers, consumers, and decomposers. In a food web, remember, the arrows are drawn between organisms to show the directions in which food energy is transferred. And if you look at the other choices, and if you're halfway paying attention, you could probably guess food webs for this one. Number 2, when energy is transferred through an ecosystem, some energy is lost to the environment when blank is given off as a byproduct of cellular respiration. So you might pause this, look at your choices, and think it over. When high energy bonds that are present in food molecules are broken down during respiration, remember, energy is released and can be used to fuel biological processes. However, the conversion is not perfect, and some of the energy is lost to the environment as heat. And if you remember a bunch of those cycles we looked at, it had the arrow going to the environment for heat. So 2 would be C, heat. Some energy is lost to the environment when heat is given off as a byproduct of cellular respiration. Number 3, the diagram below shows an energy pyramid. Which of the following best explains why the number of organisms at each level decreases while moving up the energy pyramid? So pause this and look at your answer choices. Okay, each level in a food chain provides energy for the level above it, right? So, however, the organisms at each level also use some of the energy to survive. Okay, so I think we're looking at C here. This means that only about 10% of the energy produced at each level is available to the level above it. Okay, so the animals at each level use energy, so only a small amount of their energy is available to the next level. Number 4, in the following diagram of the energy flow in an ecosystem, what does symbol 2 represent? Okay, so you might pause this and look at your answer choices. All right, in the energy flow diagram, symbol number 1 represents the sunlight, okay? And symbol number 2 is going to represent consumers. Energy enters an ecosystem in the form of sunlight, which is captured by the producers, like plants, right? And energy stored by the producers is then transferred to the consumers. All right, we've got primary consumers, secondary consumers, tertiary consumers, and some of that energy is lost as heat. Okay, so number 4 would be B, consumers. Number 5, the energy pyramid below shows a possible amount of energy in kilocalories available in the organisms at each trophic level in an ecosystem. So, according to the law of conservation of energy, energy can neither be created nor destroyed. If this is true, why is there less energy in the top of the energy pyramid than there is in the bottom of the energy pyramid? Okay, and when we talked about these energy pyramids, we put an easy number on it where we just move the decimal over 1. But as long as the amount of energy decreases as you go up, it looks like you are fine. So pause this and look at your answer choices and see what you think. All right, so the law of conservation of energy is universal. Energy cannot be created nor destroyed. There is less energy available in the top of the energy pyramid than there is in the bottom because organisms all along the energy pyramid are using energy. Okay, and some of the energy is lost between each trophic level as heat. The heat energy is dispersed into the surrounding environment, and guess what? The producers are originally going to suck that heat energy back up through the sun. So it looks like we're looking at D. Energy is lost between each trophic level as heat. 6. Examine the following food chain and choose the organism that would best fill in the blank, the question mark, portion. All right. The energy from the wheat is transferred to the mouse. The energy from the mouse is transferred to the blank. The energy from the blank is transferred to the hawk. So we need to figure out what's going to eat a mouse and what can the hawk eat. Okay. So you might pause this and look at your options. In this case, you're looking for an organism that would consume a mouse, right? But be consumed by the hawk. Hawks are carnivorous, but only consume animals equal to or smaller than they are. And a snake, okay? A snake is a favorite food of a hawk. So we're going to look at D. A for algae does not make sense. That's a producer, right? Why would you put a producer right there? And a hawk is not going to consume a cow, we hope. And an oak tree is also a producer. So why would you put that right there? Okay, number 7. I chose this question because it is really long. And we've talked about how you've got to take your time, read the question, look at everything. It's worth it to just take a breath, take your time, slow down, and try to get it correct. So for this particular question, you've got this whole first slide, and the actual question that we're going to answer is going to be on the next slide. So it's a lot of information. So let's go through it. Number 7, a group of students studied a grassland ecosystem. The students learned that biomass is a measure of the amount of matter in an ecosystem. They also learned that energy is primarily transferred through an ecosystem in the form of food. The students created a diagram to show what they learned. All right, so here's this first diagram. You've got matter and energy flow in a grassland ecosystem. After the students created the diagram, their teacher asked them to answer this question. So, how is biomass related to the energy flow in the grassland ecosystem? To help them answer the question, the students found biomass data. They created this second diagram to illustrate the data. Okay, so they created this pyramid of biomass. And if you look at their labelings here, they use a bit different kind of words that we talked about. Primary producers, sure. Herbivores at the next level would be like your primary consumer. Primary carnivores would be like your secondary consumer. And top carnivores would be like your tertiary consumers. Okay, so you can pause it, jot it down, look at this, and then we'll go on to the next actual question. Okay, so here's the question. A student makes a claim about how the heat energy shown in the diagram, matter and energy flow in a grassland ecosystem, that was that first one, helps explain the amounts of biomass shown in the second diagram, the pyramid of biomass. So here's their claim. As heat energy is released by consumers, less heat is available to organisms at the next level. Therefore, the higher pyramid levels contain less biomass. Okay, so which statement best analyzes the student's claim? So pause it, look at your choices. Okay, I feel like we could cross off B and C. Let's see. B is saying the claim is supported. The amount of biomass stored at higher levels is very small. Okay, the small amounts of biomass show that energy and matter are lost from an ecosystem. But we know that energy and matter are never lost from an ecosystem. Okay, so I feel like you could mark off B. C says the claim is rejected. Heat energy flows in all directions among the levels. So that should just make you cross that off right there. Heat energy doesn't flow in all directions among the levels. So if I would look at it, I would look at A and D, and we're going to end up going with D. The claim is rejected. Energy from food is used to produce biomass, okay? And the conversion of some of this energy to heat in each level reduces energy to be stored in biomass. Number 8, our last question, expands upon itself. So we've got number 8, and then we've got another question. We'll call it 8 continued. Okay, so you'll see this when you're looking at biology type questions. So let's start up here. Number 8, which is the correct mathematical expression to compare the amounts of energy in different levels of ecosystem? So pause this and kind of go over what you think. Okay, for this first part of 8, we're going to pick A. We could probably cross off B and C, right? Because we know that it all starts with sunlight. Okay, it all starts with sunlight. And then we just need to make sure we're going in the correct order. So sunlight energy, okay, is greater than the producer energy level, is greater than the herbivore energy, is greater than the carnivore energy. Okay, so most of the energy, that 100% of the energy, starts from the sunlight. And then if you look at the second part of number 8, based on the diagrams, which mathematical expression correctly compares the amounts of energy in different parts of the ecosystem? Okay, so if you look at this one, we're going to go with A. Okay, producer energy, this one right here, producer energy, is greater than herbivore energy right there. So basically, if you picked the correct equation here, this is the only correct answer that would be right for 8 continued. Okay, carnivore energy is greater than herbivore. Okay, that's flip-flopped. Carnivore is equal to no. Producer is equal to no. Like always, once you have fully mastered energy and ecosystems, you should be able to create a project, a presentation, or an experiment explaining all of this to your teacher.